United States adopted a very shocking decision to levy 100% tariff on EV cars produced in China and exported to the United States. They even include Chinese EV cars produced in Mexico. The Canadian government is declaring that they may be inclining towards the decision of the United States and may eventually take decisions to charge huge tariff on any EV cars imported from China. Now, the reality is that the Canadian import of Chinese-made EV car is very small. It's inconsequential to start with. However, if Canada eventually would decide to levy huge amount of tariffs, let's say up to 100%, as the United States is doing against Chinese-made EV cars, it is actually very much in violation of the free trade principle that the Canadian government and the people are very proud of, and it will actually hurt the fundamental interests of the consumers in Canada. Allow me to emphasize one point. China produced more than 30 million cars for 2023. Only about 1/3 of these cars produced in China were EV cars. For the Chinese automobile production, there is no overcapacity. The EV production is only about 1/3. Globally, EV production is even smaller. And eventually, I think, the EV production will be up to about 100%, completely replacing the fuel car production. And I do believe that China will be very happy to cooperate with countries like the United States and Canada in sharing the EV technology. And China, for example, already decided to invest heavily in EV car industry and battery technologies in Hungary, for example, to make sure that Hungary will eventually emerge as a major manufacturer of EV cars in Europe and for the rest of the world. Canada should not resist this EV revolution. For the record, the Canadian government has announced decisions to cut carbon emission by up to about 50% by 2030 and eventually achieve emission zero to 2050. However, levying such huge tariffs on EV car imports is against this principle. Now, everyone in Canada should really wake up to one simple fact, that the tariffs to be levied by the Canadian government on imported EV cars are not paid by the Chinese producers of these EV cars or by the Chinese government. The tariffs eventually will be paid by the Canadian consumers. My concern is that the Canadian government sometimes follows blindly without using their own brain power, without making their own independent judgment in the footsteps of the decisions by the United States. I would say the real choice for Canada is not between China versus the United States. The real choice for Canada is whether the United States or China is doing the right thing. Now, the US decision to impose 100% tariff on Chinese-made EV cars is staggering. It is against any decent instincts, for example, and it is generally being condemned by many countries, including Western developed countries, as well as by the United Nations system. Therefore, it is time for Canada to really use its own independent brain power to size up the situation and decide to do the right thing, rather than blindly follow in the footsteps of its southern neighbor. I think it goes without saying that Canada and the United States are two staunch allies with each other. They have very close political and geopolitical relations with each other. However, allow me to emphasize one point. That doesn't constitute an excuse for Canada not to use its own independent judgment when matters are concerning free trade, for example, and open market, especially fair trade. That's the myth. And I'm shocked by the great differences between the decisions that the Canadian government is going to make versus the decisions that great countries like Germany and quite a few other European countries are now making. They condemn the high tariffs imposed by the US government against Chinese-made EV cars exported to the United States. And I hope Canada can really learn why these important Western countries are not following the footsteps of the United States as far as the EV car imports are concerned, and whether Canada should really have second thoughts about what is the right decision for them to make, rather than purely following in the footsteps of Washington.